I had no idea how much you had in your system. I imagine this is truer for most of us, myself included, than we would like to admit. The amount of time we spend connected to our devices, the amount of time we spend swimming in this soup. There is more of us mixed up in this than we have any idea of. And it's really easy for people a little bit older than you, adults, especially parents, people of that generation, to just sort of dismiss the whole thing. This is ridiculous. You dumb kids just need to get off your dumb phones and engage with the world. I want to try to avoid that approach this morning, although I admit it is sometimes kind of fun to take pot shots at teenagers. It's just fun. But I want to try to avoid that and instead ask some questions. Some questions about how it is that we are engaging with this digital world that we find ourselves in. And the first question I want us to ask ourselves is, who's the boss? Who's the boss? Who's in charge in our interactions with digital media? This is a problem for Tom Haverford. He is not in control of his digital self. He has been completely subsumed. He has lost himself in these interactions, this endless stream of interactions. He is no longer in control. Digital media is in control of him. And it's not entirely Tom's fault. It's not entirely your fault or my fault when we find ourselves getting sucked into this vortex of digital media. Social media is optimized for us to lose control, for it to become essentially an addictive behavior. We need to understand that when we think about these digital platforms that we're utilizing, Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook if you're my age, but not so much if you're your age, when we use these platforms, we are not the customers. Facebook is not providing a service for us. We are the product that social media companies are selling to advertisers. Advertisers are the real customer base of all the social media companies. And this is not new with social media. This is how newspapers started. They got people's attention and then they monetized that attention and sold it to people who wanted people's attention. It's the same business model that was used for radio, that was used for free television, over-the-air television. It's the same business model now that's being used for social media. They are capturing our attention, monetizing it, selling it off to the highest bidder. Literally, it's an auction system. I've purchased ads in digital media, and it's an auction. You say, I will pay this much for this many eyeballs, up to this amount. And other people say, no, I'll pay a little bit more than that, a little bit less than that. They are auctioning off our attention to sell to advertisers. And so it makes sense that the mechanisms they use to keep our attention, to get more of this valuable commodity that they can monetize, they use mechanisms that are highly, highly optimized to constantly be pulling us back in. There's some research done in the early 1900s by a man named B.F. Skinner, and he had these rats. He put these rats in cages and he would experiment on them to try to understand what he could learn about how rats respond to different environmental stimuli. And rats are surprisingly similar to humans. It's actually kind of disturbing. So one of the things he would do is he would create a mechanism that would dispense sugar water at the push of a button. Rats love sugar, humans love sugar. And so they could push the button and they would get the water. And then he would do variations on this theme. So there would be a light that would come on. And you could only push the button when the light was on. And the rats would optimize their behavior. He'd put a maze between them and the button and the light. They'd learn how to navigate the maze. But the best way to get the rats consistently pushing the button is to randomize when the light would come on. If it wasn't predictable, or if there were times when the light would come on and no water would come out, they would just keep going back, keep pushing the button, consistently. And so when you think about the types of feedback we get from our interactions with social media, we are these rats in this cage, and there is random lights coming on, notifications, likes, retweets, at random times giving us a little hit of what we like. What we like, it's releasing dopamine in our system. It's the reward-seeking center of our brain is engaging and saying, hey, there's something really good that can happen when we engage in these spaces. When I post this type of picture, I get more likes, more retweets. That's what feeds our need for this dopamine. And it can become very, very easy in this environment where people are trying to monetize our attention. So constantly wanting us to come back and pay more attention to these digital challenges the Corinthians were having, and they were sort of early adopters. They like to innovate, they like to try new things, and they had this saying, this saying that had emerged within the church as they discovered the good news of Jesus Christ, where they had learned that God was gracious and compassionate, and the old Mosaic law was being done away with, and they discovered, they came up with this slogan, all things, they would say, are permissible. I can do what I want. All things are permissible. And Paul hears this slogan, and he says, yeah, but not all things are beneficial. You may be right that everything is permissible. You can do what you want, but not all things are beneficial. All things are permissible for me, he quotes again, but this is the key, but I will not be mastered by anything. I can do what I want. But the things that I want to do can begin to exert control over me so that I'm no longer in charge. And this is the dynamic that we see play out sometimes in these digital spaces where the behavior becomes compulsive, becomes addictive. So the question is, are we being mastered by this thing that is good, that is permissible? Are we being mastered by it? So one question we should be asking ourselves is, who's the boss? Another question that might be good to ask ourselves is, what do we see? One of the responses I often hear, and I've even used it myself in conversations with people about media and technology, is this idea that media and technology is just a tool. It's a tool. It can be used for good purposes, it can be used for bad purposes. But it's up to the user, not the tool itself. So I brought along another tool, hammer. You all have one of these in your house. Okay. This is like the classically neither good nor bad tool. You can use this to do great things. We actually have a team from our church right now in Ivanito, Puerto Rico, working to put a new roof on portions of Academia Mennonite, the Mennonite school there. And these guys are going hard with these hammers. They're doing amazing work. They're using this tool that itself is neither good nor bad. They're using it for a good purpose. But you can use this tool to smash up something valuable. If you really were dedicated, you could murder someone with this tool. So the tool itself, neither good nor bad, the use of it is what determines the goodness or badness of the action. But there's something else that's true about tools that goes beyond questions of are we using them in a healthy or a destructive manner. There's a question of what is the tool itself doing to us. Here's the phrase to remember. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When all you're accustomed to is one type of tool, you assume that tool can solve any problem. And so any problem you come across, you think, I'm just going to get my hammer out and start hitting things. It's got to be a nail because I've got a hammer. Let's go, let's fix it. So tools have the capacity to reshape how we experience and understand the world. And what's going on in digital media and digital spaces, absolutely, it is a tool. It can be used for positive purposes, for negative purposes. You're seeing amazing things come out of teenagers with their digital technology and social media after the shootings in Parkland. People are organizing, they're forming protests, they're pressuring their legislators. They're going to get something done because they're using these tools for positive purposes. We also see the tools be used for negative purposes. Instances of harassment and bullying, instances of exploitation. But beyond the question of whether we're using the tools in a good way or a bad way is the question of how is the tool shaping our experience and understanding of the world. And in some ways, we are just living through a massive experiment in human civilization. And nobody's really in charge of the experiment. It's just sort of happening. We don't fully understand the ways that these tools are going to reshape our world, reshape our minds, reshape our experiences of the world. All of this transformation is happening because when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when all we're accustomed to is digital interactions and social media spaces, we start to assume that every problem can be solved with those tools. something that was on his radar. These things are constantly evolving. And the good news, and perhaps somewhat terrifying news, is that you all are going to get to make a lot of these decisions. You're going to be the ones who are setting policy and determining what's acceptable and unacceptable as technology continues to change and develop, and the pace of change accelerates. You all are going to be in charge. Have you seen these robots they're building up in Boston? There's a company called Boston Dynamics. Have you seen these robots? These things are terrifying. And they pick on us. I don't understand why you would do this. Like, why would you do that? You're trying to make sure that the robot knows how to stand up straight and stuff. But they've taught these robots how to unlock and open doors. I mean, that seems like a bad idea, right? But like it or not, this technology is going to be unleashed. I think we've seen that terrifying thing. Like it or not, this technology is going to be unleashed, and someone is going to have to set policy around it. Someone's going to have to decide what are acceptable and unacceptable uses of this technology. Self-driving cars are going to be here probably within a generation. And someone's going to have to decide when the machine is driving the car, and it has to decide between hitting one pedestrian on the sidewalk or hitting the school bus in front of it, which do we program it to do? And then who do we blame when someone dies? When the government decides that the 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are piloting drones that are executing people in Afghanistan and other parts of the world, when the government decides those 20-year-olds, they're redundant, we don't need those anymore, let's just put AI with facial recognition in charge of the drones and turn them loose to go hunt terrorists. Someone has to make policy about it. And it's going to be you. When people who have grown up in a world of Tinder where trying to form an intimate romantic partnership feels more like ordering takeout, when people like that start to settle down and try to get married and have challenges, someone's going to have to figure out how do we help these people. And it's going to fall. And you have tremendous opportunity to use this technological innovation, this development, to use it to do real good in the world. I firmly believe that. But the formative experiences that you're having now, the ways that you're being shaped and molded that you might not even be aware of by the tools that you're using, this is all going to have consequences down the line. And you step into positions of leadership and authority and begin to make decisions and think through ethical issues, and a whole bunch of people who used to have jobs don't have jobs anymore because the robots took over and they turned to opioids. There are going to be some really thorny questions that come up as our technological progress accelerates. And you may not realize it, but the decisions you're making now, the ways you're interacting with technology now, will set the path for how you respond to that in your adult years. And so it's worth asking, in your interactions with digital technology, who's the boss? Who's in charge? Are you mastering this wonderful tool, or are you being mastered by it? Because it is designed, highly optimized to master you. And what do you see? When you look around and you think about the tools that you have at your disposal, is the only thing you see around you nails? Do you assume that the tools that are most natural to you are the appropriate tools for every challenge you face? And what do you think about what comes next? Whatever that looks like, as the pace of change accelerates, new things are going to come and you're going to have to make decisions. And are you preparing yourselves now to make decisions that are going to be healthy and positive? Let me pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks that you are at work in our midst. You are at work in our world. You give us the capacity to innovate and develop and change and modify the world around us. And we confess that we have not always used those gifts in healthy ways. But we know, God, that you are gracious, that you can redeem and restore. And I pray, God, for each one of us who is learning to swim in this digital soup, that you would help us to understand that, yes, all of this can be permissible for us, but we cannot be mastered by it. I pray that by your Spirit you would give us an awareness of how these tools are changing and transforming us in ways we might not presently be aware of. things continue to change and develop in the future, you would give us wisdom and guidance. I pray all of this in the precious name of Christ.
Thank you, John, for sharing with us and posing some really good questions for us to think about. On Wednesday, we'll have an opportunity to have a little bit of conversation with each other. So I invite you, there's some of you that have already agreed to share a little bit about what experiments you are doing in relation to social media. But if there are others of you who an idea was sparked in your mind and one of the questions posed here this morning that you want to share, please talk to me. And we'll see if we can have you share some of your reflections